Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, I want to start my talk with a little story. So it was January in 2014. I just started studying here, which is the Graz University of Technology, the computer science campus. And the first thing we had to learn there, or one of the first things, were regular expressions. And I was really not keen about how they were taught at university, and I thought, how could I make that a bit more fun to me? And I knew how to program, but I didn't know how to build iOS apps yet, so I thought this could be an interesting challenge, build a little app that could teach me regular expressions better. Bit complicated, but yeah. So I grabbed this book, Objective-C 2.0, because Swift wasn't around yet. And I started coding, and a couple of days or weeks later, don't really remember anymore, I had this. This was my very first app that I never shown anywhere, I guess. And it was like this regular expression crossword type game where you had a grid and regular expressions on each edge of the grid, and you had to fill out a letter that matches all the regular expressions. So was kind of happy with that. Came up with too many features that I thought I definitely had to have in there before I could actually launch it. So push notifications, easy, and an iPad version, and Game Center support, and things like that. And then university just hit me. I had to stop doing any iOS development because university was still my main focus, and I had to actually study boring maths and stuff like that. And a couple weeks went by, and when I came back to Kleene, nothing really excited me anymore. So the purpose of building this was kind of gone because I had the exam on regular expressions. I passed it, so I mean, it kind of fulfilled its purpose. But like the core mechanic wasn't really fun. Nothing really felt good in that app. So working on it felt more like a burden or like a chore than really something I enjoyed. So eventually, I stopped working on it. Skipping forward to April of that year, I was sitting home. I was rocking this watch back then, and I didn't do any iOS development for a while, but while looking at that watch, I had this idea of making just a little puzzle game that would run on a watch-based device where you get a statement like 1 + 1 is 2, and you would swipe up if it's correct or swipe down if it's incorrect. Or Paris is the capital of UK, and you would swipe down there because that's not correct. And why watch-based? Because back then, the Apple Watch was heavily rumored. We didn't know when exactly it would come out. We still thought it would be called iWatch. But we knew it will come out at some point, and I thought I'm just going to build that for iOS and bring it to the Apple Watch very easily, because Apple would be very smart and use the same technologies there. Boy, was I wrong, because if anyone did something with watchOS 1, it wasn't super easy, but they still went that route. And a couple of days later, I had this, which is my first prototype of that app, called Elementary Minute. And I was, again, really happy with that. And same story again, university, main focus, had to stop on it, working on it. But this time, things were a bit different. Because this time I had a prototype that I really enjoyed, something that I wanted to interact with, something that I just liked the animations. I could just fire up in any minute that I had between studying, play around with it a bit, and just had a smile on my face. And something I really enjoyed and something that just stuck with me. So I just couldn't wait to continue working on my app. So again, wrote down too many features, left out the push notifications this time, really smart, and eventually released the app in December of 2014. And in the meantime, watchOS was announced, so I was one of the first apps or games that were launched on watchOS. Development was terrible, and I only later found out that the reason why I'm only one of the only 4 games on the Apple Watch at launch time was that playing on the Apple Watch like this is not fun, but you don't know that in the simulator. And so I released that, and through some lucky coincidences, I got the chance to go to WWDC in 2015 in San Francisco, and I knew this person from developer relations, and he nudged me into going to the ADAs. And when I sat down and they announced the first name for the Apple Design Award, my face was suddenly up there, and I did not expect it, and I didn't know what to do. And eventually went upstage, and a few minutes later had a Student Apple Design Award for this one in the end. Thank you. And yeah, this is all 10 years ago, so very old stuff. So you might be wondering why I'm telling you this now and what happened since. So since then, I worked at Flexibits, who make Fantastical, and I was there when they won the Best App of the Year in 2020. I graduated my master's after too many years. I got 2 more nominations for the Apple Design Awards for 2 more apps that I built. And so but for all those apps, and these 6 apps are the ones that I released in those years, and the story was always the same. So I worked at Flexibits, I worked at Nuki, I studied for the master thesis. I always had those times where I just couldn't focus on working on my apps. I had to put them aside. But if I had something memorable or something that really excited me, I could push through those times, and I could eventually release them. And so finding that memorable thing always helped me to eventually get to the point of a release. And while preparing this talk, I looked at other apps that really excited me, and I think that these kind of apps follow a similar approach. So for example, Gentle Streak is a fitness tracker that I really, really like, and it can give you a hint or a little text about your productivity today or how much workout you can take today, and this nice little activity graph. But it can also break down the calories that you burned during a workout in burgers and fries and stuff like that. So fun stuff, things that I really enjoy and that are just joyful and memorable to me. Or Carrot Weather, that puts a smile on my face every time I open up Carrot Weather, because it throws at me some stupid joke or some stupid sentence when I just wanted to check the weather. Or basically anything that comes out of not boring apps. They can make something mundane like a calculator very fun by just doing little animations, nice sound effects. Not sure if you can hear them, but just super nice stuff there. And also making one of the most satisfying checkmark animations there are. And so all of those apps have something memorable, a core component that really sticks out, and all of them won an Apple Design Award. And so I want to stress this, that finding something memorable will really help you to stand out. And I mean, that's kind of the obvious part here, but it will also get you through the rough patches of development. And when actually building a new app, I always run through those 4 phases. And to show you those 4 phases, I wanted to introduce you to 2 of my apps and show how I went through those phases with those 2 apps. First one is Study Snacks, which is a vocabulary trainer where you have a list of vocabularies, like here are the colors in Spanish and English, and you click Study, and the app splits them into pieces, and you have to put them back together. Yeah. So silver is plata in Spanish, like this. And yeah, this one. Letter Rooms is an anagram type game where you get a hint and some letters, and you have to find the correct solution based on that hint. So for this one, it's marathon. Yeah. Coming to the idea, and coming up with an idea for my apps is usually always happens where I personally least expect it. It happens when I take a break from work, actually, because I, in the past, tried to force myself at work to come up with this new idea that could actually really be super cool. But every time I came up with an idea in those places, it just didn't stick with me, and I really couldn't work with that for a long time. But when I sat down to read a book, when I looked at my watch, which I explained earlier, or went to a museum, I always had those ideas that really got me excited. So for study snacks, and it's down there in the corner about which app I'm going to talk about, you just have to believe me, that's study snacks now. I watched this movie, maybe some of you know that, that's Ex Machina. And that's a sci-fi movie, and the chain of events of how I came from a sci-fi movie to a vocabulary trainer is very obscure, and a too long story to tell you now, but just believe me, that's how it went. And for letter rooms, I actually was walking around my neighborhood and just not thinking a lot, and the bus went by, and the bus sign up there, which says 65 Hauptbahnhof, was broken, and instead of saying this, it said something like Utah. And I thought this would be quite an interesting idea, that you can just turn off letters or find other words in words. So main message here is to take breaks and get inspired. Next up is the prototype. And in the prototyping phase, it's really important to get to a result as quickly as possible and to start that as quickly as possible while your idea is still fresh and while you're still excited about that and didn't give it too much thought yet. So this is going to hurt, but at this point, I don't care about clean code. I don't care about an app architecture, and I don't care about an app data model. And yeah, it's for us engineers, it's always difficult to do those things, but it's really, really important to get to a quick result and to not waste any time on making this perfect architecture of your app that you then potentially not going to use because you find out that the prototype isn't as fun as you imagined. So I want a quick result. I want to use familiar technologies. So for me, that's usually Swift, SwiftUI, SpriteKit, which is a 2D game engine from Apple. And I copy code around from different projects that I built. If I use a technology that I've never did anything with before, I just look up some sample projects or turn to ChatGPT or something like that and just copy code out there. And it's OK to throw away that code afterwards. So sometimes I'm fine with that Frankenstein monster that I created, and I use that code, but sometimes I just throw that away and build it completely new. Because when you actually build the prototype and build the first version that you're excited with, you much better know the requirements for the architecture, for the data model, and everything. And I don't only care about two things at this point of time: if the app is fun and memorable, and if I can make it accessible. Because I have a huge opinion on vision accessibility, and I sometimes come up with ideas that are not easily make accessible for blind people, and at this point of time I would stop or come up with an idea of how I can make it accessible. And for study snacks, I called it word bubbling at first. I just sat down, used SpriteKit, used Swift, and after a couple of hours, I had this prototype, which looks basically very similar to the final app, where you could just select some animals in there. All the data was hard-coded. Things weren't super fluid, but I was kind of happy with that, and much of that code is in there since I built that first prototype. For letter rooms, the story was a bit different because I came from the idea of turning letters on and off. So I had the design idea of using neon lights and turning them on and off. And that just didn't feel super fun to me, not really, didn't have any character, was kind of mundane. So I thought something is there, but that's not quite it. So I had the idea of giving each character a bit of character by adding a pattern to each character. So each C has one particular C letter or pattern, or a particular R pattern. And each character gets a different color. You can see that hopefully now. And that just looks much more fun and much better, I think. But I quickly realized that for very long words, just turning letters on and off is not very fun. So I added the second game mechanic where you could just move letters around. So basically an anagram. So I had two game mechanics, one where you can, where letters that you can just move around but not turn off and on, and the other ones were turning letters on and off. And that was enough to excite me and to have something where I could play the same levels over and over again. I knew the answers, but it was still fun to me. So I knew it's something I want to continue working on. So I go into refinement state. And refinement is always about to nail the core experience and get rid of any interaction quirks. So I care about the onboarding, I care about the initial impression that the user has, but I do not care at all about most of the UI or most of the features. It's just getting the core right. And I think this is much more valuable to do in person or over FaceTime than just sending out test flight links. Both are okay, and I do both things, but for the very initial refinement stage, doing it in person just gives you so much more information, because you can really see the person's initial interaction or reaction to the app. People tend to blame some interaction quirks on themselves, so they think they are too stupid to understand something, but actually it's a design flaw from you, and you realize those things much better if you see that in person. And also know you get an initial impression of a user only once, so I usually give my app to one or two people, see their interaction with it and their initial reaction, refine based on that, and then give it to the next ones. So very slowly iterating to something that can work. And you can do these kind of things on places like here, on conferences. This is a conference in Vienna, the Play Austria, where I showed off some of my apps before. You could do it on meetups and just ask people there and show your newest app there. Or you can buy your friends food and force them into using your latest app. And for letter rooms, doing this, basically nothing changed. So the initial interaction already worked very well, and nobody complained about anything other than that some levels were too hard, so I had to shuffle things around. But for study snacks, there were a few things that had to change. Like, I started up with this, where you always had to confirm your answer after typing something in, and people just felt like this slows you down and doesn't add any value. So I removed that, and nobody complained, and just interaction was not much nicer. Second thing was that many people complained that the app felt too static and not much is happening before you actually finish a word. So over here, you can see how I showed it to people, and I came up with the idea of expanding a bubble a little bit as soon as you touch it. So the bubble grows bigger, everything else shifts a bit, and it feels much more dynamic. And that's one refinement that I did for study snacks. And the last one that I found most interesting was this one. Every time I gave somebody a phone or an iPad, they started to nudge it a little bit because they thought that the bubbles would move with the device rotation or with the movement of the device. And as soon as they realized they didn't, they just continued interacting with it. But nobody actually told me that they did expect the bubbles to move. It was just from me seeing their initial interaction with the app. So I added that, and you can just now move the iPad around. You can just turn it upside down, and all of the bubbles fall out. And I showed. Thank you. I showed that to a designer at Apple Park a couple of years ago, and he was sitting there just for a minute and turned his phone upside down and back up again, and was so excited about this. So I knew this is something I definitely should leave in there. And I would have never found that without doing in-person tests. And also one thing that I always do here is to ask people who are vision impaired or are blind to interact with my app. And I now knew a few people that I can send my app to, but before that, I always went to AppleWiz, which is a community of vision impaired and blind users. And you can just post about your app there and get very, very wonderful feedback about it and enhance your accessibility. And if you're building apps with Swift UI, there's basically no excuse to skip on accessibility because doing it is so easy. After having something that the prototype that really excited me, refined, that really excited some of my friends, I want to release it, and I want to do that quickly. And I force myself to do it quickly with something like pre-orders. So I have a new app coming up. You can pre-order it by scanning that QR code. It's called Art of Fauna. And doing that pre-order gave me a deadline and forces me to release this in 3 weeks, even though many things are not finished yet, and I'm kind of scared that it's really working out. But I went with the date, so I have to. And I think a deadline is a really good thing, that it forces you to really finish up things. But it also forces you to think about marketing material early. Because if you are like me, I'm usually doing screenshots and app previews and marketing texts at the very last second of development. But having to set up a page for pre-order forces you to think about that much earlier, maybe talk to a designer to actually make some nice screenshots. And it also gives you the possibility of getting featured. And for Fauna, I really had good luck that I got featured by Apple. And this is the graph of pre-orders. And I now have short over 5,000 pre-orders. And all of those pre-orders will turn into actual downloads on the very first day and give me very good rankings on the very first day the app launches. So pre-orders, really nice thing to do. Second thing is to reuse as much as possible. And this is kind of easier for someone like me who build a lot of apps, but it should just show you that if you build an app and it doesn't really be as successful as you had hoped, there's still value in that, in releasing this app and really finishing it up, because you build so many things along the way that you can just reuse with your next app. And here is just some code, because I wanted to show some code today. But this is this is a text style modifier that I always use instead of the font modifier, which lets me to quickly iterate over fonts. And then I have a theme settings and a theming system that I always copy over between projects and always reuse. And the cool thing about this is that I can just use components that I use in other apps and iterate, put them into my new app and iterate over, do I like this green primary color? No, not really. But this indigo is really good. Do I like this font? No, that's not it. I will go with the other font. But it helps me build a system where I can have multiple different themes on my app and quickly change between them. But it also allows me to give those same tools to users and let users change the font or the colors. So this is a font that's more legible for people with dyslexia, and people can just use the same system to change their font to that. And that's kind of cool. And also change the colors to something that is more legible for people with certain vision impairments. So stuff that I reuse are few modifiers, extensions. So these two screens are basically the same, just with other theme settings applied and in different apps. I reuse privacy policies, localizations, not as much anymore because of AI localizations, but can still copy stuff around there. Inner purchase logics, sound and haptics handling, and many more things. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is the value of reducing your scope. So for study snacks, again, I fell to the same trap as always, too many features that I wanted to have in there at the launch. But this time, I already set up a pre-order, and I knew I had to launch this thing in like 2 weeks, and I knew I can't finish all of that. So I had to skip on many of those features, and having skipped many of those features gave me ideas for future updates and a list of things that I could actually publish as updates. And then send to Apple, ask for a feature nomination, and maybe get featured in the future. And one point where this really worked out well for me was for interactive widgets. Because I skipped on doing widgets for study snacks on the release, and shortly after, Apple released interactive widgets, so I reiterated over my plan, and instead of having a very boring widget, I came up with this, which is a little vocabulary trainer directly on your home screen, and you get just one vocabulary, could quickly fill it out, and either quickly jump to the next one, or wait for a bit, and it would automatically show you the next one. And I'm not sure if I would have spent time to build something like that. If I would have had already a widget in there, I would probably focus on something else. But skipping on the widget gave me extra reason to do a widget now. And Apple loves interesting usages of their new APIs. So I got featured with study snacks on the release of iOS 17. It was back then called Study with Subwords, and I renamed it since then. But it was featured on iOS 17, even shortly in the US, and that spiked the users really good. So very, very good to yeah, so not sure if that would have happened if I shipped the widget initially. And a great tool to communicate what you are planning to do in the future is Roadmap. That's a package that was built by Antoine, Hide, and Jordi. And what Roadmap is actually doing, best show that in Now Playing from Hide. It gives you the possibility to communicate all the features that you want to build in the future to your user, and show the user what you are actually interested in building in. And it allows the users to vote the different features up, so they can also communicate to you what they are interested in. And I think this is a very cool thing. It's free to use, so I can really encourage you to use it. And I want to close this talk with just saying, when you're releasing your app, just don't worry too much. Get it out there. You'll do fine. And with that, I say thank you.